Hello and welcome to this video. We were continuing the first chapter of your history, that is how, when and where. In last video, we discussed about how important dates are, and in this video, we will discuss about which dates are important. Some dates become vital because we focus on a particular set of event as important. If our focus on study changes, if we begin to look at new issues, a new set of dates will appear significant. Some dates seem more significant to us because some sorts of important events happen on that day. But if we shift our focus, we might find some other sets of dates as important. For example, suppose your date of birth is 15th August, then it is very obvious that 15th August will remain special to you because it is your birthday. But if we try to analyze the date 15th August from others' perspective, it might not be important for them because it is not their birthday, but that same day might be important for other Indians because 15th August is Independent Day. So the same date might possess different importance for different people, or different date might possess importance for different people. For example, suppose you have 7 friends. You all 7 friends have different date of birth. Then there must be 7 different dates which is important for every individual friends of you, but that same date might not be important for you. So a date became important when some sorts of important event associated with that date. Not all dates are important. As we discussed in last video, that history is not all about dates. All dates are not important. Few dates are important, and those few dates are those dates which are associated with some sorts of important events. For example, in the histories written by British historians in India, the rule of each governor general was important, but the history that revolve around the life of British governor generals, the activities of Indians simply do not fit. They have no space. So in the history written by British historians, the dates those are associated with the ruling of governor generals of India might seem important, but in their perspective of history, the common people had no space. So on those same dates, like on 15th August, if you have your birthday, and on 15th August we observe Independence Day, the same date might possess two different special events. Like that, the same date which are important in the Indian history written by British historians, as those dates are associated with the ruling of British governor generals, that same date also associated with the life of common people. But because for British historian common people were not so important, they never bothered to write down those important event of common people, and in that way those dates only important for the Britishers and not for Indians. These historians begin with the rule of first Governor General Warren Hastings and ended with the last Viceroy Lord Mountbatten. So, according to the British historian, according to their description of history, their important dates begins with the ruling of Governor General Warren Hastings in India and ends with the last Viceroy of India, Lord Mountbatten. They never bothered to capture the important event in the life of people of India. But if we try to look at those dates from the viewpoint of Indian historians, the events might shift from British Governor General's lives or ruling period to the pain and trouble faced by common people of India. So, when we talk about history, it's not a very short period. Even if we focus only on the colonial period or the British period, the history is too long because Britishers ruled Indians for 200 long years. And it is not easy at all to study, to analyze the progression, the development, the changes took over all those 200 years at a go. And in order to simplify that, we need to periodize the history by studying the dates, reasons and consequences of events are understood better that way. For that, we have to periodize it. Periodize it means we have to divide the whole past into groups, from this period to this period, that period to that period, and x period to y period, like that. We have to group that, we have to periodize the history, we have to periodize the past in order to get a more clearer view and more clearer understanding. It is to give each chapter some coherence, to understand a set of events in the way that makes some sense. And in order to understand the chronology, the consequences, the past event which led to the next event, the consequence of the event, the cause of that event, in order to analyze a particular event from all the aspects, its cause, its happening, its consequence, in order to understand that clearly, we need to periodize the history. We need to divide the history into specific periods where we can focus on a specific event over a specific period of time. The next question is, how do we periodize the history? Okay, for some instance, let's periodize the history in order to get it more clearly. But the question is, how do we periodize the history? Beginning with that, a British historian named James Mill divided the Indian history into three periods: the Hindu period of Indian history, the Muslim period of Indian history, and the British period of Indian history, or the Christian period of Indian history. We can call the British period as Christian period also if we look at the religious of the Britishers. So James Mill divided the history of India into three periods, that is Hindu period, Muslim period and British period. They show how we see the significance of the change from one period to the next. And in that way, James Mill divided the Indian historical period into three different periods, and by dividing that, he tried to show the significance of the change that took over the period. How Hindu period of Indian history was, then what kind of changes took place during the Muslim period of Indian history, and then what kind of changes took place in the period of British Indian history. According to Mill, telling of history before the British came to India, Indians were very uncivilized and British rule could civilize India. According to James Mill, it is very obvious because he himself was a British historian. So he thought that before British period of Indian history, during the Hindu historical period of Indian history and Muslim historical period of Indian history, Indians were very uncivilized and the British rule civilized the India. According to James Mill, he thought that Indians were very uncivilized before the British rules in India, and the British rules in India civilized the Indian people. This periodization came to be accepted widely in those days, but some historians also criticize this periodization, as this periodization only focused on the religious importance and none other progress or development. We already talked about the periodization of Indian history by James Mill in your class 7th, if you remember. So many historians were there who criticized the periodization of Indian history by James Mill, as he focused more over the religion and less over the progress and development. Now, if we consider the periodization of Indian history by James Mill, there are certain questions which has to be answered, like, can such a conception be accepted today? Can we refer to any period of history as Hindu or Muslim? Is it fair to refer a historical period on the basis of religion? Because did not a variety of faith exist simultaneously in this period? Just think, is it possible that during the Hindu period of Indian history only Hindus were there in India? Or during the Muslim period of Indian history only Muslims were there? Or during the British period of Indian history or the Christian period of Indian history only Christian or British people were there? No, there were several variety of faiths existed simultaneously in each period of history categorized by James Mill. So it is not fair to accept his division. So, as the periodization of James Mill failed to please many historians and many people, moving away from that classification, many historians have usually divided the Indian history into ancient, medieval, and modern. As the classification of James Mill kept many historians unsatisfied, they moved to a new type of periodization and they divided the Indian history into ancient, medieval, and modern. This concept of dividing the history into ancient, medieval, and modern was borrowed from the West. West means mainly the developed countries, the Europe, America, these countries were known as West countries. So the periodization of history as ancient, medieval, and modern is borrowed from the West, where medieval was a term used to describe a society where these features of modern society did not exist. And modern society or modern period was associated with growth of all the forces of modernity like science, reason, democracy, liberty, and equality. The West people used the period medieval in order to describe less progressive society, whereas they use the term modern period in order to describe various factors of development like science, reasoning, democracy, liberty, and equality. Now, the question is, does the idea of West of dividing their history on the basis of progression fits Indian history as well? Probably no, because if we consider Indian medieval period, there was a lot of prosperity, whereas the West people seek medieval period as less progressive period. If you remember the history you studied in your class 7th, you must have remembered that there were various development took place in the medieval period. Many kings were constructed various type of architecture, public facilities, various technological development were there like firearm combat, Persian wheel of irrigation, etc. If you remember, so the Indian medieval period of history is associated with lots of progress, whereas West people consider the medieval period as less progressive. And if we follow the Western ideas of periodizing history, their modern period means the period which is associated with lots of development of science, development of reasoning, development of democracy, liberty, etc. But look at the irony. The British period of Indian history might be a period of modernity and development for the British people, but think about it from the Indian people's perspective. It is not at all the period of equality, freedom, liberty, etc. because we were ruled by the colonial people. They merely allowed us some liberty, freedom, equality, or any kind of progress and development. So the Western idea of medieval period is less progressive period and modern period is more progressive period. But if we follow their idea, the medieval period of Indian history is just the contradictory period where the Indian people witnessed lots of development, and in the modern period, rather than witnessing development or progress, we witnessed a lot of repression from the colonial people. So, in this case, also the dividation of Indian history as ancient, medieval, and modern failed to some extent, and because of that, some historians again proposed a new periodization, and they suggested that rather than considering the British period of Indian history as British or modern, we can consider the period as the colonial period. That's all about this video. Thank you.